China carries out a historic mission to the moon to bring back samples for the first time in more than 4 decades. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. China's Chang'e 5 probe successfully blasted off from the moon this week after collecting lunar samples. The mission marks the first time since 1976 that a country has attempted to bring back moon rocks and dust to examine. On Friday, the probe successfully unfurled the Chinese national flag on the lunar surface, a feat that took scientists a year to develop. If all goes as planned, the probe is expected to land in Inner Mongolia in less than 2 weeks. Scientists hope to learn more about the moon, including its precise age. For more on China's lunar mission, let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Austin, Texas is Stephen Clark. He's an editor with Spaceflight Now. From Orlando, Florida, John Zarrella is a distinguished journalist who covers the U.S. space program. And Yang Yuguang is a professor from China Aerospace Science and Industry Corporation based in Beijing. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. And Yang Yuguang, let me start with you in Beijing. The moon probe has taken off from the moon's surface. It will now reconnect with the orbiter and transfer its payload of rocks and dust to that orbiter, and that orbiter will then make its way back to Earth. What do you make of progress so far, and what are the major challenges that lie ahead?
Well, you see, it is a really exciting moment for China Aerospace. You see that launching or liftoff from another celestial body is a very great task, very tough. And you see that before the landing, we don't know the coordinate. And also, the attitude of the spacecraft on the lunar surface have influence to the liftoff. On the ground, on the launch pad or launch complex, we have all kinds of measurements to have the accurate coordinate, the accurate attitude, and also a good connection link to the spacecraft to test everything is okay. But on the lunar surface, we don't have so many support. So also the ground station is far from the spacecraft, about 380,000 kilometers away. So this is really a very great challenging for us, although US and the former Soviet Union have done that before. So this is very great progress for China Aerospace. And after that, the most challenging part, to my personal opinion, is the lunar orbit rendezvous and docking. You see, the China, US, and Russia, and even Europe and Japan have done many times on the low Earth orbit. But still, this is the first time the unmanned automatic docking performed far from the Earth by human being. So this is the first of human being. And also, the measurement of its velocity and position, we have only limited measures.
Stephen Clark, the last mission to bring back lunar rock samples was a Soviet mission, which was back in 1976 when there was still a Soviet Union. This time, the rocks have been collected from a part of the moon that's not been explored before. Also, they had this probe that went 6 feet down into the lunar surface to collect samples from there. What are scientists hoping to learn from this?
You're right. Well, the Chang'e 5 mission landed in a part of the moon where some remote sensing data from orbiters indicates that the rocks in this area of the moon are much younger, could be much younger than the rocks that were returned by the Luna missions and the Apollo missions from the 60s and 70s. So scientists are eager to get their hands on the specimens that the mission brings back, and they're going to be able to date some of the material to see, maybe how long ago the rocks were deposited on the moon from volcanic activity. A lot of scientists, a lot of the samples that have been brought back to date were dated to maybe 3 to 4 billion years ago. But there's some evidence that suggests the rocks that were in the region where Chang'e 5 landed may be just 1 to 2 billion years old. So it may be an evidence of much more recent volcanic activity in the moon's past.
All right, let me bring in John Zarrella from Orlando, Florida. John, great to see you. China landed a rover on the far side of the moon, sometimes called the dark side of the moon, and now we have this probe. And as I said, the last lunar missions were decades ago. How has technology changed since then?
Oh, well, look, dramatic differences in what they're able to accomplish today and what they could accomplish with the rudimentary. I mean, it was phenomenal landing on the moon in the 60s and early 70s and bringing back hundreds of pounds of moon rocks. So, you know, what the Apollo program did and what NASA did was spectacular. But the new technologies that they're bringing to bear, the new technologies that NASA is developing to get down to the surface of the moon, to bring humans back to moon, same thing that China wants to do in the late 2020s, is going to allow them to spend more time at the moon, spend a lot more time at the moon. In fact, there's some thought that you know, the first U.S. landing on the moon, if it happened in 2024, whenever it happens, there'll be 5 EVAs during that first mission, which would be unheard of. Even the Apollo astronauts who, you know, I've spoken to about that have said, 5? How can you pull off 5? Well, it's because of all the technological advancements, precision ability to land exactly where you want to land, the upgrades in spacesuit technology, upgrades in your you know, rovers that they'll use on the moon. So everything that they're going to bring to bear in the mid-2020s, late 2020s, will be markedly superior to what was afforded to the Apollo guys back in the late 60s, early 70s.
One other thing, John, and I was wondering how big a difference this is, and that is we understand that the lunar module that connects with the orbiter will be doing so, they will be circling the moon, and this will be the first robotic attempt at docking. How big a difference is that from what happened earlier on?
You're talking about with this current spacecraft now,
right,
the Chinese spacecraft?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, certainly with Apollo, they had to do the same thing and come back up and dock, but you had humans in the loop. Here you've only, you know, that you've just got the robotics, which is completely different. Even when NASA goes to Mars and lands rovers on the moon, you know, to this point, you're not flying back off of Mars and docking up and transferring samples, although NASA has done it now with the asteroid retrieval mission, bringing back the materials from that asteroid. So it's not unprecedented. There's certainly some differences, but it's again, it's one of the newest technologies out there, and so far, whether it's NASA or whether it's China, they're proven that they can do it.
All right, let's bring Ray Wang into the conversation. Ray joins us from California. He is the principal analyst and founder of Constellation Research. Ray, great to see you as well. We were talking about this latest Chang'e 5 mission, which has been launched by the Chinese. Well, of course, the craft has landed on the moon, collected the samples. It's now back on its way to meet at the orbiter and head back to Earth. What do you make of the launch so far?
You know, I think it's been flawless. They've seen a lot of ways that they can actually automate the launch process. They're definitely learning a lot about what's required to actually get to the moon, come back, and make those more frequent trips. And I think it's one of the first steps to really getting to, you know, more manned missions as they get to that level of automation and a level of comfort. This is similar to what we're seeing with Elon Musk's rocket, the idea to actually get these rockets up running automated, doing automated landing, being able to land, blast off back from the moon, blast off back from Mars, and have that capability to not just go somewhere, come back, and begin the process of manned missions. So we're at a very exciting time in space and privatization of space and getting out to space in a way that we haven't seen since the 60s and 70s.
Young Yuguang, I want to look a little bit beyond lunar exploration and talk about Mars right now. China, of course, is also involved in that race to Mars. It launched a probe in July, which is expected to reach the red planet in February. What can you tell us about that mission?
Well, you see now the Chang'e 5 is orbiting the moon, waiting for the rendezvous and the docking and come back. And the Tianwen 1, you see that we launched early this year, is on its way to Mars. This mission, we will have a lander, a rover, and an orbiter together, so a combination of the three. But because you see that the Chang'e 5 is a probe with a mass of 8.2 tons, and we launched the Tianwen 1 Mars probe with the same launch vehicle, Chang'e 5, or Long March 5, so it's a little bit lighter, so it's only a 5-ton spacecraft. And because we need to combine the three missions together, so each part of the probe is a little bit smaller than the Chang'e 5. But this is the first time for China. You see that years before, U.S., former Soviet Union, Russia, and also Europe launched many probes to have a landing attempt on the Mars, but only the U.S. can success. So you can see how difficult it is. The problem comes from the atmosphere of the Mars. It must be considered, but it's still very, very thin.
Okay, John, the United States and the United Arab Emirates are also involved in a mission to Mars. What can you tell us about that mission?
Well, the United States has got Mars 2020, which they launched a few months ago, which is going to get to Mars the end of January or so. And it's a massive lander. And one of the interesting things about that mission is that will be the precursor to a sample return mission from Mars. So what they are going to do on the ground there when they get there is they're going to leave, drill, do the same kind of things that the Chinese lander just did on the moon. But in this case, they're going to drill down, they're going to get samples, they're going to put them in canisters, and they're going to leave them on the surface. And then another mission will come later in 2024, 2025, pick up those samples, fly them up to an orbiter, dock with the orbiter. Again, all of this automated technology that we're talking about, and then bring those samples back to Earth sometime around 2029, 2030. It's a long, long process to do it, but that would be, if successful, clearly and obviously, the first samples coming back from another planet other than what we got from our closest neighbor, the moon. But Mars 2020 is a giant rover, very sophisticated, and the hope is that in those samples, they will be able to detect some forms of previous microbial life that might have existed on Mars. That's the hope. Maybe it's more than a hope, probably a dream.
There's also been a lot of speculation, John, on whether there was water on Mars at some point. Will these samples be able to tell them that?
Yeah, I think so. And I think clearly there is already pretty significant, solid evidence that in a lot of these places where they've already landed and where this spacecraft, where this rover is going, pretty significant evidence that these are dry lake beds. That's what where they're going now, was supposed to have been a river and a dry lake bed. So most everyone is convinced that at one time there was water, and clearly, on the poles of Mars, there may well be, water ice there. And that's significant if you can get water, because then when you go to Mars, you can use that water. You need that to make rocket fuel to come back, lots of different things and applications that would be vital for when humans finally visit and spend any duration of time on Mars. You're going to have to make your own rocket fuel to get back off and get home.
Stephen Clark, of course, there's been lots of speculation when the first humans will be able to land on Mars. Elon Musk, the founder of SpaceX, he's been talking about that. He predicts that humans could be on Mars possibly within 6 years, or by 6 years, I should say. This is what he had to say. Let's listen.
I feel fairly confident about 6 years from now. So the Mars, Earth-Mars synchronization occurs roughly every 26 months. So we had one this year, this summer, and so that means in roughly about 2 years there'll be another one, and then 2 years after that. So I'd say if you say 6 years from now, I think highly confident. If we get lucky, maybe 4 years.
So Stephen, what do you make of those predictions from Elon Musk?
I think that sending a human to Mars in 6 years is probably a pretty aggressive timeline. If you ask NASA, the earliest they could send people to Mars would be the 2030s. A lot of things would have to go right. There would have to be a lot of money invested into a crash program like that to send humans to Mars in 6 years. I think probably 10 plus years is a more realistic timeline, 15 years maybe. And even that, thinking about it, there's a lot to do to prepare a mission like that. And that's pretty aggressive. And, Elon Musk is a serious, serious engineer, serious businessman. He's had a consistent message since he founded SpaceX almost 20 years ago that he wants to send people to Mars. He wants to make humanity a multi-planetary civilization, as he says. And that's been his objective, and every move he's made at SpaceX has been toward that goal. But I do question whether it's really 6 years away.
Ray Wang, the next step for China is a permanent space station, and that's scheduled to take off in 2022. What is the status of that operation, and why a permanent space station?
Oh, a permanent space station is important, right? There's a lot to do in terms of studying the effects on the body, in terms of being able to do space experiments in order to do construction into space. And having the space station, as you've seen with the International Space Station, has allowed people to conduct experiments that they wouldn't have conducted before, and to understand what it would be like to manufacture in weightless environments, what it would be like to create life and actually colonize space. So it's the first step, and it's a very important platform in your ability to get to other planets. And so we're going to see more of that, and we're going to see more of people's views, well, the ability to actually start colonizing. That effort to get the space station, from what I understand, is actually on track. And I think there's still partnerships, too, going on, and international cooperation with both the European Space Agency as well as NASA and some private investors, too, in China that are looking at this.
So with these, like a space station, would that act as some kind of halfway house for people or for missions deeper into space?
It is. Think of it as the space extension of the Belt and Road Initiative in the long run. But it is the gateway into other missions, right? So if you want to go to Mars, if you want to refuel, if you want to build more, if you want to build prefab some of the items for colonization, get it up to the space station as an area, anchor it in there. Try to get it docked into the moon, go from the moon back to the space station, back to Mars, right? Think of it as a gateway point that's going to be important.
John Zarrella, NASA will be launching the Falcon 9 rocket with what's called a cargo Dragon capsule. That takes place this weekend, and that's from Florida. What's that mission about?
Well, that just goes to the International Space Station, and it's bringing up all kinds of supplies, and it's loaded with experiments because they've got a whole bunch of astronauts up there right now because we know that they just flew up the Crew 1 team up to the space station. So there's a lot of astronauts up there and a couple of cosmonauts that are up there. And so they needed to bring up a lot of experiments. So it's a regular resupply mission that goes periodically to the space station, bring up a bunch of stuff, bring back junk they don't need anymore, back, when they return, when the capsule returns. So that's what it is. It's basically just a routine resupply mission, although nothing about space is routine. Mm-hmm. But as we've been saying, with Elon Musk and SpaceX, they have managed brilliantly these Falcon 9 rockets and getting them off the ground and then bringing their booster back so they can reuse the boosters. One of the boosters has already been used 6 or 7 times, maybe more, but a phenomenal number, which reduces the cost of getting to space, which is a huge plus for the future going forward. That's what you have to do. The poundage, how much it costs per pound to get to space, is reduced greatly when you can use the same booster over and over again.
Right, and this cargo Dragon capsule, John, is that just the capsule that carries the experiments?
Yes, it's the Dragon cargo, which is a different version of Crew Dragon, which of course obviously has all the life support systems, et cetera, that you don't need when you're using the the version to just bring up supplies.
Yang Yuguang, is it likely that China will attempt some kind of manned mission to the moon in the near future?
This time the Chang'e 5 mission, the mission profile is quite different from that robotic missions of the former Soviet Union. They choose to direct ascent from the lunar surface and directly come back. We choose to have a lunar orbit rendezvous and then come back, which have a very, very similar profile with the Apollo program. I mentioned to the media many times that the lander and the ascender combination is like the lunar module of the Apollo program, and the orbiter and the re-entry capsule is like the CSM of the Apollo. So you see, we will have a good preparation for the manned missions, but still the central government has not approved this program, but the leaders of China Aerospace has expressed their wishes many times that we will have this kind of mission in the future. And also, some key technologies have already been prepared. For instance, such as large thrust engines for the giant rocket needed, and also the new generation spaceship for this mission has been tested during the first launch attempt of Long March 5B. But I also emphasize again that we may have a permanent base on the lunar surface and on the Mars, but I don't think the human being now has already mastered the technology to colonizing Mars.
Stephen Clark, there's a scientist at the University of Auckland in New Zealand who said that the next decade will be crucial in space exploration. She said it will mark the time when we transform out of near-Earth orbit into deep space. Explain this to us, and how will that era unfold?
Well, if you're talking about human space exploration, NASA has the Artemis program, which is attempting to send astronauts back to the moon in the 2020s. The Trump administration has given NASA the mandate to try to do it by the end of 2024. It's not clear that schedule will be maintained under the Biden administration. But certainly, NASA is making moves. They're developing a giant rocket called the Space Launch System. It's several years delayed, but perhaps it could be ready to launch by the end of next year on a mission without astronauts. And then a couple of years later with astronauts to send them around the moon. That'll be the first time astronauts go to the distance of the moon since the Apollo program in 1972. And after that, NASA is partnering with commercial companies, including SpaceX, to look at how to land the astronauts on the moon once they get to the vicinity of the moon. So certainly, NASA has been flying human missions in low Earth orbit, this regime a couple hundred miles above the Earth, really since the 1970s, since the end of the Apollo program. Astronauts have not ventured beyond that distance. And I think we're on the cusp of within a few years at least, of sending astronauts beyond that distance for the first time in, approaching 50 years, be it through the NASA program or through SpaceX's program, or perhaps a marriage of the two.
Ray Wang, the last time we talked, and that was back in June, China had successfully deployed into orbit the last Baidu satellite, setting up this navigation network. What is the significance of that achievement? What does this network do?
Oh, the network actually helps on the Earth side as opposed to the space side. What it does is actually provides a massive coordination of communication and communication capabilities for China. So just like GPS satellites are being used, that's one of the areas, but it's being used for space exploration. It's being used for Earth exploration. It's being used for ocean exploration. And those satellites are providing a key infrastructure element for not only on the ground level, but also in the long term for being able to use for space communications. So what we're seeing with those satellites is now a pinpoint accuracy in GPS that's even more accurate than the European GPS system and in some cases the American GPS system that's up there.
So will that be used for communications, things like telephones, et cetera, and GPS getting from one place to another?
It can be. There are lots of uses. For example, we can use that for autonomous vehicles. We can do that for autonomous mining operations and construction. You can use that for pre-military kind of capabilities. You can use that for speeding up 5G networks in the long run, being able to actually adapt those in the future to be able to handle 5G communications back to satellite networks and all the way back if you want to. But the main point is the fact that the pinpoint accuracy of those GPS satellites allow for a whole bunch of location-based services to emerge and to emerge in the 5G network on the ground for China. And that gives a huge capacity and advantage for companies that are trying to do business in an automated fashion and in a digital capability.
John, you focus on this industry, these missions, very closely. What are your expectations from the United States in the years ahead?
Well, from the United States, I think, clearly, and I think Stephen brought it up, there's no guarantee that in the next administration that there's going to be as much enthusiasm about getting to the moon as quickly as the Trump administration wanted to do it, landing a man and a woman by 2024. I don't doubt that they're so far down the road now on this Artemis program that they will continue in that vein to go ahead, get ready, and go to and go back to the moon with humans. But there may be other priorities. So I don't necessarily believe, and a lot of other people don't either. It was a nice goalpost to have, but going back to the moon may not happen until maybe the late 2020s before they actually get humans back there. And a lot of it has to do with technology, as we were saying. The lander is still just the company that's going to build the lander and ascent vehicle hasn't even been chosen yet, and you're talking about 2024. And as Stephen said, the SLS is years behind schedule. That's the Space Launch System. It's not ready to fly yet. So, you know, I think that the reality is that robotic exploration of Mars will continue. The space station will be given a new lease on life. They will extend, which is what they believe under a Biden administration will happen, that they will get funding and money to extend the life expectancy of the space station, and that then eventually the United States, in perhaps the later 2020s, will be ready at that point to send humans back to the moon, and then eventually set up a moon base and use that as your proving ground to test your new technologies in order to get to Mars sometime in the 2030s.
You know, John, I asked Stephen a moment ago about Elon Musk's comments on getting humans to Mars in 6 years. Do you think he is being a little bit too optimistic there?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I'm kind of like with Stephen. I'm pretty skeptical about that. I think that, you know, Elon's great, but remember, you know, if you just think about it, the Crew 1 launch and the first flight of his Crew Dragon with Hurley and Bankin a few months ago in the end of May, that's 2020. That was delayed about 4 or 5 years behind what Musk had first, you know, times that I've interviewed him over the past years ago, had said he'd be ready to take humans. So, you know, he does need to raise money. He needs capital. And if you're going to talk about going to Mars in 6 years, he is a businessman, as Stephen pointed out. You're going to want to raise capital, raise money, get investors to buy into all this. And then, you know, if you're delayed, which I expect he will be, because there are so many hurdles to overcome, not the least of which is radiation exposure on a trip to Mars out there. So, you know, I'm not buying it just yet.
Ray, you want to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, right, it's probably 8 to 10 years at most to get something that's a prototype, but to actually get the human element, which everyone's talking about, that's so important. The radiation exposure, being able to deal with those types of flights, trying to understand what the crew needs are. I mean, these are long journeys which we've never done before, and there's still a lot of understanding about the human body that needs to be done. These experiments are going to be conducted there, but there has to be enough precautions before we get there. So it looks like at least 8 to 10 years out.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.